So what we're going to do today is just some basic scouting knots and some pioneering skills and some bits and pieces that you should know, should have experience in. All part of the pioneering badge, all part of scouting, and everyday skills can be used for all sorts of areas to your life. Knots are useful. So the first thing you need is a good knife. Any old knife. You don't need a big craft knife or a survival knife or anything for this. You're just going to be cutting through bits of rope. So a simple Swiss Army knife with a decent blade to it. And for getting through rope a little bit better, a serrated knife. This is a sailor's knife, the sheepfoot blade, serrated blade that will just go through rope like butter. The other thing about the sailor's knife is it also comes with a marlin spike, which will be useful when we come to doing splices. Okay, so when it comes to doing splices and working with ropes, these devices, which are fids, come in useful. A fid is basically like a marlin spike. It's used for separating the strands of the rope. Push that in, opens it up, allows you to pass rope through rope. That's a normal fid. This is a Swedish fid. The difference being, instead of having a solid core to it, it's actually hollow. So when you push that through the strands of rope, it creates a channel which you can push your piece of rope within. Now, my hands happen to be a bit too big for this one, so I've tied a Turk's head around it just to be able to give myself a bit more grip. Useful ropes. Oh, and a hangman's noose scissor loop. The last type of fid I have here is just these little things that you can get on eBay or craft shops or whatever. These are good when you're working with paracord or thin rope. They have a screw bore down the centre that you can use to screw your piece of paracord onto, so it'll act like a needle. So it just helps you passing bits of paracord through each other. But it's essentially a fid. It's used in exactly the same way. You're using it to part the areas of your knot or your rope to pass another piece of rope through. So this strange device is called a sailor's palm. Now, the way it's worn is you pop your hand through, thumb on the top, it straps around, nice adjustable strap to keep it on your wrist. Now it has two main elements to it. This piece of reinforced rawhide, and then this dirty great thing that looks a bit like a giant thimble, and that's exactly what it's used for. So this just a bit of reinforcement there is just to protect your hand when you're using it. And what it's actually used for is to drive needles through bits of rope. There are some, especially sort of knots, sail making, whippings and so forth, where you need to actually push a needle through rope. And so the needle's head just fits into there in exactly the same way as a thimble catches the end of a normal needle. And then when you drive it through, if it does happen to slip off, you've got all of this nice rawhide to protect your hand. So that's the way it's used, just for driving needles through very tough material like sail or other bits of rope. Okay, when you get to the end of a piece of rope, and obviously frays, what we can do to stop it from fraying is to add whipping to it. Now we'll get more into whippings later, but there are several different things that you can use to whip a piece of rope. We have electrical tape, which gives you a temporary one, but really quick. We have whipping liquid, which is horrible to use, but forms quite a nice waterproof coating to it. It's like a rubberized liquid that just seals the end of the rope solid. We have whipping twine. This stuff is similar to paracord some nylon type construction or something, but, which makes it strong, but also makes it subject to heat and flame, which means you can seal the whipping in once you've done it. And a lighter. Now I've wrapped this lighter, you can see all that muck on there. I've wrapped this lighter with a simple a whipping in leather cords, just using a whipping technique to do that. And what it gives me is a basis for being able to tap out ends of paracord, once I've melted them so that they are nice and sealed. I can tap it out on there. But lighters for using with this stuff, and for sealing in the ends of paracord and other nylon rope types, then they're useful devices to have as well. Okay, so some other little odds and sods here. So these buckles are really cheap from eBay. You can get them by the hundreds and things, but they're useful for making bracelets when we come to that. There's a bracelet I've made earlier with a bit of flasher buckle on it, but they work same kind of things, just a spring-loaded thing that snaps shut, and make those kind of things for next to nothing. The other useful thing that I've found is just to have examples of knots floating around. It's one thing reading knots out of a book, but another thing when you've actually got physical examples of them. So when you're learning knots, just take your time. This is a little pole with some various hitches that I've tied onto it. Had that for a while. If you can make up knot boards, or you can just tie examples. Keep examples of various ropes, knots that you've tied, so you can pick it up whenever you need a reference to go by. And in fact, in making these videos, that's exactly what I'm using this for. The first category of knots we're going to go for is stopper knots. They're easy knots to tie, and they are, as the name implies, for stopping. You can tie a knot, simple knot, go through, so that if you've got a loop or anything like that, it will prevent it from going through there. Right, so first simple stopper knot is the overhand knot or the thumb knot. So all that happens there is you go over the top, form a loop, go around, back through the loop and pull. So that is form a loop, come back across the loop and pull. And that is thumb knot. Figure of 8. The figure of 8 knot is like a thumb knot, it's a stopper knot, but it's bulkier, so it can stop a bit more. That's all we do to tie a figure of 8. And there are lots of ways to tie this, but this is just the way that I found easiest for me. You start off as if you're going to tie a thumb knot. And instead of going through the loop like you would on a thumb knot, go across the back of the loop and then around and back through the loop there, and that gives you the figure of 8. So that's start off with a loop as if you were going to tie a thumb knot, come across the face of the loop instead of going through it, go around the back of the loop and then up through and then pull, and that gives you your figure of 8. Okay, Fisherman's Bend. So joining knots are, as the name suggests, knots that join ropes together. So we've got 2 different coloured ropes, so hopefully you can see those. The first one we're going to do is Fisherman's Bend. Now Fisherman's Bend is just 2 thumb knots. So we take our first bit of rope and we tie a thumb knot around the other piece of rope. That's step 1. Step 2 is we take the other end and we tie a thumb knot around the other bit of rope. So all we've got is 2 bits of rope with thumb knots tied around each other, and when we pull, the 2 thumb knots meet and they form a join, and that is a Fisherman's Bend. The reason why it's called a Fisherman's Bend is because it's mainly used for tying thin pieces of rope together, or thin pieces of line or whatever. So fishing line is one of the common uses, tying two pieces of fishing line together, but it can be used to tie any thinnish pieces of things together. Don't use it for big ropes. Now, one of the most famous knots in scouting, it's on the main badge that we wear, the world badge, promise badge, is the Reef Knot. Now, even though it's famous, it's not a hugely brilliant knot, but we'll go for it anyway. Now, you've got this common piece of poetry, which is right over left, left over right, and I'll show you how that works, but then I'll also show you how you don't need to remember that. There's something that I find a bit more simple, a bit less thinky, but we'll go. So right over left means you've got your two bits of rope, you put your right hand one over the top of your left hand one, and then you just put a little twist around like that, and that's the start. And then the second part of it, left over right, is the left piece of rope, which happens to be the same one as you started on the right. It's now over on the left, and you put that over the top of your left, and then put a little twist in it, and then when you pull it, you form a reef knot. Now, as you can see by the reef knot, you've got these two loops that seize each other around. So you can see how they slide up around each other. And that makes the reef knot, even if you really pull it tightly, it still makes the reef knot pretty easy to undo, and that's its primary use. It's for tying pieces of rope together of relatively equal thickness, where you would like to be able to untie them again, regardless of how much pressure is put in. You certainly don't want to use it as a climbing knot. I'll show you that in a second. So, my less thinky, poetic way of doing that, of remembering how to tie a reef knot, is just take two bits of rope and twist them together. And then, when you actually look at the twist that you've done, it just so happens this time that I've done it in the opposite way to the left over right method we showed earlier. But it's always, if you look at the twist, you have one rope that's going underneath the other, one rope that's coming on top. And all you need to do is to take the rope that's coming on top and put it on top again. You twist there, and you end up with a reef knot. If you do tie it and it doesn't do that slide, doesn't have nice neat loops that slide, then quite simply you've done it wrong. Now I'm just going to show you why you shouldn't use this to climb on, and it's better exampled by using some nice solid slippy stuff like this, which is just leather cord. So I'm going to tie a reef knot in this leather cord, and you can see, there we go, we've got a reef knot, nice neat loops, everything else, and I'm climbing on it, I'm climbing on it, I'm climbing on it, I'm climbing on it, I'm climbing on it. So yeah, it's not the strongest knot in the world. So please don't hang on it or do anything like that. It's very useful, as we'll see in other things. It's very useful for tying off lashings or starting them, or finishing off whippings, and just tying temporary joins and things. But you know, don't tie it around anything that's going to take any strain. Definitely don't climb on it. Definitely don't tow a car on it or anything like that. It's a useful, quick knot that doesn't really have a huge amount of strength to it. That's the reef knot. Okay, surgeon's knot is just a variant of the reef knot that's a little bit stronger. And if you remember what we were saying about with the reef knot, it not being very strong, and you just wanting it to be a temporary tie. The same is true from the surgeon's knot, but you just want it to be a little bit stronger and a little bit longer lasting. They usually use it for tying off things like surgical stitching and stuff like that you don't want to last forever, but you know, you don't want it coming undone before before it's due to come undone, or before the suture is actually dissolved in the body or whatever. Anyway, so you'd start it off. Let's do the leftover right thing again. How do you right over left? Oh, never mind. Right. So, in order to do this, you start off by putting the twist in as you would for a reef knot, but then you put an additional twist in, and that's all it is. It's a reef knot with an additional twist, and then the rest of it you tie in exactly the same way. So the one that's on top goes on top again, and then you just put a single twist in that. So it is like a reef knot, only this time it's effectively a twist at the top that is locking in a double twist at the bottom, and it's a lot stronger, and as you can see it doesn't slide up the loops like a normal reef knot does, but it's still, because of that loop at the top, it's still quite easy to undo. And that's a surgeon's knot. It's just a variant of the reef knot. Okay, another stronger tying knot than the reef knot is a sheet bend. That's sheet. There is a sheep shank that we'll deal with in this, but this is a sheet bend. So called because it's used for tying down sheets or sails. A lot of knots originated on board ships, and if you see the old sailing ships, there are miles of rope. Anyway, with a sheet bend we start with what's called a bight. Now, a bight is a loop in the rope that doesn't cross. That's B-I-G-H-T, bight, not I'm going to take a lump out of an apple bite. So rather than a crossing loop, we have a non-crossing bight. It's just a bend in the rope. So this is our standing rope. So if this is halfway up a mast or anything like that, we don't need to have anything to do with this rope other than to put a loop in the end of it, or a loop in the middle of it. It doesn't actually matter. So I'm just going to start with bites in the end, just for the heck of it. But this end, the point is, this end we're not going to do anything with. So we've got our bite, and we've got our working rope. So we pass the running end of this rope up through the middle of the bite, and then it comes around the back of the bite there. And then when it comes back up, we're going across the face of the bite and underneath itself. So effectively what we've got is a crossing loop around a standing bite, and we pull all that tight and we end up with a sheet bend. You notice that my fingers on this never change position, so we don't do anything with this other than making the bite in it. So this rope is a standing rope, we're just making the bite in it, and all of the work we're doing with this one. And it's, again, unlike the reef knot, quite a strong rope, strong joining knot. Now, other options for this, if you need something that's a bit stronger, you can do what's called a double sheet bend, and all that implies is we're doing something twice, double twice, right? So we're coming up, then we're going around the back of the bite like we did before, but instead of now coming up and across the front of the bite, we're going to go around again. So I'm just going around the bite, the back of the bite twice. Now I'm going to come up and go across the front and across and underneath itself, right? So I've got coming up and around and then back up and across the bite. I'm going to pull all that tight. You can see it's got quite a distinct, you can see where the crossing loop comes in. There's our standing bite, and there's our locking. And you can do triple and whatever. One thing you've got to remember though, if you're doubling up knots, is that there is a point, depending on what kind of rope you're using, but every kind of loop and wrap over and everything else that you're doing, you are weakening the actual rope itself. Now, if you put a double loop into paracord like this, then the strength of the paracord is still far exceeding the strength of that, so that's still fine. But if you put quadruple and so on, and you've got you know, whatever, thin hemp rope or something like that, there comes a point where you tying this is actually affecting the strength of the loop the joined ropes as a whole, and you end up introducing a weak point in your tie. So just bear that in mind. The more loops you put in it, the weaker you're making the integrity of the whole thing, even though you're making the knot stronger. Right, so one of the purposes of the sheep bend is to actually tie ropes of different thickness together. So you can tie ropes of the same thickness together, that's fine, but here we've got an example of a piece of rope that is very much thicker than the piece of rope we want to tie onto it. And so what I'm going to do, the bite always goes into the thicker piece of rope, right? And all I do is to come up, around the back, across the face, exactly the same. So there's our crossing, our standing bite, and our crossing loop in our running line. Pull it tight, and there we go. That is now nicely snug and joined. So that is a sheep bend. Okay, a good joining knot, Flemish Bend, it's a joining knot that can be used to climb on. It's a lot stronger than a reef knot. And the easiest way to tie this, I think, stop that slipping down, is start off with a figure of 8. See earlier for tying figure of 8. So you've got your figure of 8, but keep the figure of 8 open. So don't tie it, don't pull it tight, because you'll need that as a guide for travelling round to do your Flemish Bend, right? So a Flemish Bend is pretty just much a figure of 8 tied into a figure of 8. So there's our first figure of 8. And we'll get our second piece of rope. And then what we're going to do is just follow the first through all of its loops. So we go there, coming up alongside it there, and then we're going to go around that loop there. You can see it goes under this one, and then it goes under that. So that's where we're going to go. So through there, and you can see that's following around. And just as by the by, whenever you're tying any knots and things like that, if you can keep things as clear and as neat as possible, you see a lot of people when they're trying to tie knots and things like that, they're doing this and they can't see what's going on, and they end up with a jumble of ropes and things. So just keep things, you know, nice and clear. It's easy for you, and it just makes for a nicer knot tying experience. Okay, so you can see we've come up under there, and now we need to go inside this loop around there and over the top. So we're going to poke that through there, and we're going inside that loop there, and then finally it goes underneath here and out there, and that's exactly what we're going to go. So underneath there and out through there. So off that goes, and as you can see, it's all nice and neat. We're following exactly the line of our figure of 8. So what we've got there is 2 figure of 8s on top of each other from different directions. Okay, so all that remains for me now is to tighten up both figure of 8s, and then we end up with a nice and tight Flemish Bend. And that is a really strong bend. I want to give you the same example as we gave with the with the reef knot slipping over nice slippy leather cord. Just tie a Flemish Bend in this, and then you can see just the difference. So where the reef knot went and just slipped out, hopefully our Flemish Bend will not. Our Flemish Bend will be nice and strong, and will just this is why people don't go climbing and things on leather rope. Right, So there we go. Anyway, so we've got our Flemish Bend there, despite how awkward it was to tie. Okay, and so this time, if you remember the reef knot, it just went and decided that it was going to just slip and fall apart. But with the Flemish Bend, I can pull that, I can pull that, I can pull that, and the chances are it's going to be the leather that goes before the actual knot goes. That's not going to slip. Okay, so there's another bend. This is another one where you're weaving two things inside each other. This is a Carrick Bend. It's also, if you've ever seen any heraldry, you see a funny squiggle, then like a overlapping cross. That's the Carrick Bend. It's a heraldic knot as well. It's basically you're weaving two cross loops into each other. So you start off by having one cross loop. And the second, the easiest way to remember it is it's a weave, so you're going over and under and over and under. So we're going under here, so we need to go over there. And because we've gone over there, we need to go under here. And because we've gone under here, we need to go over there. And because we've gone over there, we need to go under here, back under itself there. And then finally, because we've gone under here, we need to go over there. And if you are familiar with heraldry at all, then you may have kind of seen, probably depicted a little bit neater than that, but you may have seen that kind of crossed loop knot at the bottom of some shields and heraldic devices. But that's a Carrick knot. And then when you pull all of the loops tight, it just forms sort of a nice strong joining knot. So that's it. It's the Carrick Bend or the Carrick knot.